Hello, and welcome back to the Horizons Review. I know it's been a while. I've had some stuff going on in my personal life, but I'm here tonight with my friend Alex Murshak. He's the host of the Hacking State podcast here on Substack. And we're going to be talking about Hubert Dreyfus's What Computers Still Can't Do. Alex, if you'd like to give a little bit of an introduction to yourself for the listeners.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. Good to be here. So for those of you who don't know, I am the host and writer behind Hacking State. The focus of Hacking State is on how technology changes our relationship to power, each other, and ourselves. So I've been writing and talking and interviewing on the intersection of politics and technology, with sort of a focus on political theory for the last like 4 or 5 years now. And that's kind of my main thing.
Yeah. So we're talking about Hubert Dreyfus's What Computers Still Can't Do. And there's a few different reasons I wanted us to talk about this book, and I wanted to talk about it with you in specifically. Um, so for those who don't know, the original version of this book is actually quite old. It's compiled from research that Dreyfus, he was a philosopher, did in the 60s through the early 70s, critiquing what was then the dominant paradigm of artificial intelligence research, which some people will call it good old fashioned AI, and more technical terms call it symbolic AI. And the way to look at this is AI that tries to interpret the world as a series of rules and data that you have to, like, you've got a bunch of data, and then you just have to have all the correct rules to interpret that data. And at the end of that, you have what we think of as intelligence. So one way to phrase this is the idea that all intelligence is algorithmic. Sometimes how people put it, but I think that summation is maybe slightly misleading. Um, we're specifically talking about his 1990 revision of the book, What Computers Still Can't Do. Um, the main difference is there's a long introduction to this version of the book. The most interesting part of this introduction is actually that Dreyfus is talking about some of the potential new avenues of AI research, which were popping up at the time. The big one being neural nets. And Dreyfus does admit that neural nets avoid some of the critiques that he had of symbolic AI. So, what are his major critiques of um, symbolic AI? So the main thing is that he's trying to make this point that no, human beings, like the way we reason, what intelligence is, it's not like this rules based operational thing. And I would say, like, the most important critique that he makes of this rules based idea is he's very specific that he doesn't think it's going to result in natural language use. Like, I think that's a very key critique. And Dreyfus, I think, is often um, dismissed by modern AI researchers for this, all in times for this reason, because they often sort of like they read summaries of the book and think that he's talking about what, when he says what computers still can't do, it's like such a strong title that that he isn't just critiquing a particular research program. But yeah, I was just wondering, Alex, since you said you have some experience working with someone who is a symbolic AI researcher, what you thought about these symbolic AI critiques that make up the bulk of the book.
Yeah, I think for people around our age or especially younger, even symbolic AI as such, that is the field of academic research that was focused on creating artificial intelligence through what can broadly be described as sets of explicit rules, right, to follow. Seems almost foreign to us because, as far as most of us have known about AI, we've been talking about neural nets, and neural nets aren't entirely new either. They have been around. I mean, depending on how far back, I mean, you can go all the way back to like the perceptron, but my understanding is that if I'm correct, I think neural nets themselves, as we understand them right now, go back to at least the 1980s.
Yeah.
Um, and yes, and so I did have a chance to work under someone who is an old school AI guy. My former boss, Nick Casamides, worked under Marvin Minsky in his lab at MIT, and then he went on to be an AI researcher at Sony, I believe, and then he started a couple of companies. The one he's currently running, Drive That AI, and um, the consensus, and this is the view that I sort of received from him as well, among the community, was that the rise and the success of neural nets, and in particular transformers, which we'll probably get into later, um, really was perceived by many to put the nail in the coffin to this whole line of research called symbolic AI. And this is quite big because for many listening, and for those who don't know, Marvin Minsky is probably one of the most premier and earliest AI researchers of all time. His lab at MIT did a lot of the foundational work in the history of artificial intelligence, and so for that line of inquiry to go dry, to not only go dormant, but to seem defeated is actually a big deal, because there are many academics and researchers who spent a good chunk, if not all, of their career focused on this particular area of artificial intelligence. And so, what it means that we've had so much success coming out of neural nets, which is not symbolic AI, and that very little of what we have right now, at least, comes from the area of symbolic AI, is kind of a big deal, and it also, of course, raises all kinds of questions about the nature of intelligence itself,
Yeah.
what intelligence is, and so forth. Now, I will say, just as a caveat before I finish this point, that um, the individual that I spoke about, Nick, believes that ultimately there is going to be a symbolic AI component to general intelligence. That if we do
Yeah.
discover something like artificial general intelligence, it will be some kind of hybridization of the current modes that are dominant, as well as different approaches and methods borrowed from symbolic AI. But that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, actually, this is like the important like defense of symbolic AI that I wanted to give, and also this is a common critique that's leveled at Dreyfus, is that people sometimes claim that Dreyfus said that computers can't play chess, and he does seem deeply skeptical of the idea that symbolic AI is ever going to lead to a successful chess program. But of course, we now know that actually, like, symbolic AI turned out to be very, very good at the chess problem once it had enough compute, using search algorithms, which were already known to AI researchers back in the 60s when Dreyfus was writing these original essays. So, like, not just Deep Blue, but like the chess engine that you can install on your phone right now is a triumph of symbolic AI, and an area in which symbolic AI like still enormously outperforms an LLM. If you've ever tried to play chess against an LLM, it's pretty comical. So I don't know if you've tried that experiment, like getting an LLM to like give you moves in algebraic notation and seeing if it can play chess. It's just, it's a terrible chess player if it even makes legal moves.
No, I haven't. I haven't myself. But there are domains like this where the LLMs are just notoriously really bad. The most notable one being mathematics at the moment.
Yeah.
In many very simple cases, as people
Yeah,
see.
mathematics is getting rapidly better on some models, but like only for specific domains
Right.
of mathematics. Like some types of algebra, some types of calculus, but then like also there are very specific proof engines out there as well. But these are all usually very, very specially tailored, and most consumer models kind of get what you get. But yeah, no, this is actually something you were talking about. You mentioned was that okay? Well, maybe we can have a hybrid, because there is this idea. It's like, okay, like human beings, like we actually have like these two types of of intelligence. We have like sort of this like broad search and like diffuse thing that we do in certain domains, and then we like focus inward and actually rely on like discrete steps. So the example that I use for this is actually, once again, it's a human playing chess, like someone who's really really good at chess. Well, they develop an intuition for a lot of chess. Like once they've played a lot of different openings and a lot of different mid games, like they start, a lot of things kind of become automated for very good chess players. They see the best move on the board. But then they get into situations where it's like, no, actually now I have to back out and I have to start thinking, all right, what is the likely, having to do like more like heavy compute on what are the likely outcomes of making this particular move. And so like one looks more like the neural net style of intelligence and the other looks more like um, the symbolic side of intelligence in that sense. Um, so yeah, there is this hope that I think there's a hope also like I would say the third hope is like the not just the hybridization of symbolic and neural net style AI, but also the idea that another critique that Dreyfus makes that I think we'll get more deeply into later on is the idea of embodiment. That there's a core element of intelligence that actually comes from being an embodied agent. And you might need a robotics element or something else to generate a fully AGI style artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this embodiment question is, a really big deal because if it turns out to be the case that you do need embodiment of some kind in order to get generalizable intelligence, then then robotics is really the place where you have to go. And in robotics, there are all kinds of problems that we have to solve:
Yeah.
materials problems, hardware problems that are not too crazy, but are largely unsolved at the moment.
Yeah.
And we've actually, we've made pretty good progress with things like reinforcement learning, and using those to train robots. And as people, especially in what is this fall of 2025, are going to be aware. We've got Tesla's Optimus, and we've got, of course, the Boston Dynamics robots. And so robotics is a field that's advancing quite rapidly. There are also some people in working in driverless cars at either for Tesla's driving program or at Waymo, or in particular, I'm thinking of Comma AI, who are very focused on the problem of self-driving cars explicitly because they believe that a self-driving car is close enough to a not a robotic, but close enough to an embodied experience of the world that it actually pushes us a lot closer to artificial general intelligence than other modalities.
Yeah. It is interesting to me though that last year um, the former MIT uh, major robotics professor Rodney Brooks like had some words to say about generative AI. Not just was like generally skeptical, but was very specifically skeptical about their application within robotics. That he thought it was a bad application of generative AI was to put them into robotics. Um, and once again, I'm not technical enough to really be in this space, but what I did find telling about is that most of the critiques that I saw from LLM researchers of this were more along the lines of, this is an old guy defending his research program rather than, oh no, here's why it will work. Um,
Yeah, I don't know enough about robotics to say a lot about that dispute.
yeah. And like I am trying to keep this on like a level too where like a non-expert can't talk about it, which is by the way something that I think is good about Dreyfus's book is to recommend it to a general reader is that there's a good combination of, unlike a lot of other philosophers who have commented on AI, and there's plenty of them, it's very clear if you've done any of the computer science literature reading that Dreyfus actually did the reading. You can say that maybe he didn't understand it as well as he could have, like whatever. There are critiques you could make, but he did do the reading. Like he actually did try to understand the field on its own terms and not just weighed in as a philosopher from like a 10,000 foot view and, throw down lightning bolts or something.
Yeah, it's definitely it's
And
definitely an accessible read for sure.
yeah, and he brings that research into terms that I think a normal intelligent reader can come away with, like an idea of like what these research programs were actually doing and talking about.
Yeah. One thing that I just occurred to me now is that I think it's actually non-obvious for people that are not kind of steeped in this world already why it would be the case that that there's this question of embodiment and what that
Yeah.
means. And I think this kind of leads us naturally into the discussion of the phenomenology of intelligence, right? That is, of some portion of our intelligence is experience based in the sense of it comes out of not just experience in terms of learning, but experience in terms of our being in the world.
Yeah.
And in this section of the book, Dreyfus is talking a little bit about Heidegger. We don't need to get into deep into Heideggerian philosophy for this talk, but one of the things that occurs to me is there's a lot of discussion around kind of the ambiguity of language. And this is sort of one of the classic failure modes of a lot of the symbolic AI is like when you're teaching it grammar or you're teaching it how to discern semantics, like the meaning of a phrase or the meaning of a sentence or the right interpretation of a given phrase. I can't think of a good one at the top of my head right now. You start running into all these problems that really have to do with understanding context deeply. And context is really about experience. One of the things, I'll just give a slight anecdote for my own personal life at the moment. So I'm in a foreign country right now. And as a result of this, I do occasionally have to interact with people who don't really speak much English, or in some cases, none at all. And the result of this is that when we need to communicate, all of what we communicate is through very simple words, half of which maybe they don't understand, none of which I understand from their part, and body language and gestures, right? And the only reason we're able to like sort of functionally achieve anything in these situations, right, is because we've all had similar enough and repetitive enough human experiences to understand one another without being able to have the means of communication, right? And so
Yeah.
in these travel scenario that I'm describing, it's almost a perfect encapsulation of the failure of the symbolic mode, because without all of that latent context and environmental experience, we just simply wouldn't be able to communicate because we don't share a common protocol.
Yeah. It's I would say like we don't need to get into depth into Heidegger, but I think it is important to like maybe take like what Dreyfus feels is like his major insight from Heidegger and how that applies, which is he feels like he takes away this strong sense of Heidegger is that, oh, like human beings are not these rational agents that always need to have a representation of how they exist in the world. Is like usually they're just like embodied in the world and reacting to it. So like the world is there like presence to us, and like tools become extensions of us, like the things in front of us like become extensions of us. Like we don't think of ourselves as like, oh, like there's this object on my desk, there's this object on my desk, like how do I manipulate these in space? We just kind of like these things are all present to us and we just do with them what we need to do with them. There's like no sort of like rules based execution or um clear rational if then like sequence stepping that we're going through and deciding what to do.
Well, there is in the beginning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When a baby is born, it doesn't even know how to use its limbs. It can't even feed
Yeah.
itself, right?
Yeah.
And in the beginning, most of the things, pretty much everything we learn, is explicit rule based,
Yeah.
and then slowly it becomes more unconscious, and then eventually it just becomes
Right.
automatic, right?
Yeah. Heidegger talks about this in terms of. I mean, this also happens in adults. He talks about it in terms of like craftsmen.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually some interesting research about this. About I feel like it was 10 or 15 years ago, where some researchers what they did was this feels like I love it when researchers do stuff that sounds like mild torture. And what they did was they set up people to like use a computer like normal and like achieve tasks, and they hooked them up to to machines to like measure to measure their brain state, and they were having them use a computer mouse and like clicking around at objects and stuff like that. And then occasionally they would like flip a switch that would mess up the mouse firmware and the mouse wouldn't work correctly. And like because people are so used to using computer mice, like we kind of just treat them as like this extension of our body. And then like as soon as they would do this and they would make the computer mouse like mess up and not work as expected, it was like the same parts of the brain were lighting up that like light up for like you being in pain or your own body part, dysfunction, having a dysfunction.
Mm. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And at the time, like people were like, yeah, this experiment is like actually an empirical verification of Heidegger's concept of like being at handedness.
Yeah. I mean, I have a few. Sorry for all my travel regaling, but I have a few recent
Yeah, I know.
examples. So I learned how to surf while I was here, and that takes a few days at least. And it's one of those things where when you first start, you 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 suck at it. You can't even get up. I mean, you'll try to get up, but like you won't get up. And then after a while, and it is a bunch of explicit rules. Like I need to put my foot here, and then the other foot there, and then I need to stand this way, and my head needs to be this way, right? And your whole goal is to make that process automatic because, of course, while you're thinking about it, you're not going to be very elegant at actually doing it. And you need to like practice that over and over again until you actually get really good at it. Um, and so there's all kinds of skills that humans learn that sort of uh, become part of us in this way. And
Yeah,
then after a while, we're just kind of like moving through the world, and that's kind of how humans work. I think it's important because it shows you how much of what we know is embedded context. And actually, I think one of the interesting things that's happening in the world of AI tooling right now is that a lot of the improvements that are coming are actually from improvements in things like memory and context, not in training models. We've gotten very far in training models, but actually, according to some people, it's an open debate at the moment, but we might be pushing the outer limits of how good the models can get with just more training time and more training data. And a lot of what appears to be the improvements that are left to be made seem to be about, getting better training data, of course, getting more if we can get it, but also just getting better context and getting better memory around these AIs. And I think that in its own small way points to um, this area that we're edging into, which has more to do with kind of implicit knowledge and experience and context.
yeah, yeah. It is interesting. Like in general, like he does just have this statement um, in the introduction to the new version where he was like, "Yeah, it's like, oh no, these neural nets like don't have to do like this representationalist thing at all. They kind of they move almost to like immediately towards this more like embodied reactive, like not embodied, but like this more like reactive, like expert level um, reaction, which is one of the fascinating things about LLMs is that when they're working correctly and not hallucinating, they're highly impressive. Like I can set out Gemini 2.5 in research mode, ask it to compile a list of sources, summarize the sources for me on a particular question, and it does a great job. But then it starts to break down at the point where then you start asking it questions about the research after it's done the research. And then it often hallucinates answers to your questions that were not in the actual research database at that point. So it is really funny, like um, what makes these things like look expert is also what makes them do this other thing, which seems highly inelegant to us. Though, I mean, it's not like bullshitting is alien to human intelligences either.
Yeah, and
I,
you know, it's funny though that they still do that despite all of our work in trying to make them not do that. Um,
yeah.
you know, if you look
Well,
at if you go and cover like the system prompts of some of these big consumer models like Claude or ChatGPT, I mean, they have uh, so many lines and statements and precautions trying to get the model to just like act with fidelity to what the human is asking it for,
yeah.
and it still does this.
Yeah. Well,
And I'm someone like I'm sorry, but like I work with LLMs pretty much all day long in the work that I'm
yeah.
doing, and so I have to get really good at steering the model and catching it when I know that it's either going to screw up if I don't do something properly, or
Yeah.
when it does screw up, figuring out how to prevent that. And actually, a lot of my workflow is literally built around how do I like take this repetitive task that I know I'm going to have to do like 100 more times and make sure that when the LLM is asked to do it, that it doesn't screw up.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I wanted to talk about actually in this sort of like using um the AI space, or like how we react to failures in LLMs, that I think are really interesting. One is the metaphor of hallucination. So I completely understand why this is the metaphor that we all agreed to arrive at and use for these particular failure modes of LLMs. But like a lot of things with LLMs, like I'm not entirely sure that this just doesn't further mislead us about how they think versus how we think. And I'll give you an example. So I not infrequently hear voices. So my guess is what happens, because I'm this is not like a schizophrenic ideation kind of way. I just hear voices sometimes, and my guess is my hearing is pretty sensitive, and I'm hearing like some sorts of white noise or other things going on at like sort of the boundary of my perception. And my brain is sorting these out into I'm hearing the voices of people that I know, like usually saying things that are very indistinct. Like I can't quite make out what they're saying. Um, and you would say like, okay, well, actually, maybe that does sound like what an AI is doing. You're just like auto completing this noise in your environment into some sort of um, rational thing that you can actually grasp. And then there's the other side where it was like, well, no, it's not exactly like what the AI is doing, because for two reasons. One is that the AI doesn't know. There's usually no control within the AI that allows it to like from some higher level like go through the process and distinguish this was a hallucination versus this was an actual answer to the question based on existing data. Um And then the second thing is that, well, no, it all hallucinations by AI are just the same sort of thing as when they get things right. They are like from the point of view that like the LLM is kind of like a natural language processor autocomplete, which is a simplified idea of what it is. Um, the hallucination is just, yeah, it's just auto completing, just based on like somewhere in your prompt, like you either misled it to think that there was something there to autocomplete, or it is just doing what it does. And so, is it really, is hallucination the best metaphor for what's going on? And I think the answer is still yes. Like, I don't know if there's another mental metaphor that we can really assign to it, but does it lead us to maybe trick us into thinking that the mind is already something more like our mind than it already is?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting point because the word hallucination. Well, I have two thoughts about this. I have a deeper thought and then I have a more superficial thought. I'll try to articulate the deeper thought first. So the word hallucination does seem to me to be a little bit of an anthropomorphization of what these
Yeah.
models are doing, right? If you think of the fact that these models are basically large statistics engines that are doing a form of gradient descent, right? Would be the ML term, or hill
Yeah.
climbing, right? More explicitly. So it's like you've asked me a question. The answer to this query is sitting in this like giant n-dimensional domain, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the optima, the global optima for that domain. Okay, and then every once in a while, I'm going to hit the global optima. But if you ask me like a very narrow question, or a question that I haven't seen that frequently, like a low probability token arrangement, then sometimes instead of hitting the global maxima, I'm going to hit some local maxima, and I'm going to spit that out to you. And that's going to give
Yeah.
you the wrong answer because I'm going to be missing something, or I overlooked something, or you asked me about something earlier, but my context window has been getting too long, so I've been getting confused. I'm already personifying the AI, but
You're right.
and and that's not exactly a hallucination, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think when people talk about hallucination, like in the example that you gave, you're saying, oh well, I think what I'm just doing is like trying to do some form of pattern matching to this white noise. Well, the LLM isn't exactly doing pattern matching, right?
Right.
It's not looking at a grid and then saying, oh, like what goes into what goes into this hole? Oh, the square, the triangle, right?
Yeah.
The meme, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 So
Just
so
throwing everything in the same bucket. Like, yeah,
right,
I'm throwing all the
right.
white noise in the voice bucket.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's not doing that at all. So I think that's useful. I agree with you though. I don't have another um, apt metaphor top of mind. And then my
Yeah.
last point, the sort of more superficial one, is like, and this is just a lore theory, is that maybe hallucination, and again, totally speculative, came from the fact that like one of our earliest examples of a consumer facing AI app was actually Deep Dream, if you remember.
Yeah.
The like one of the earliest image generation models that was publicly
Yeah.
available.
Yeah.
Uh,
Everything. Yeah. It became a collection of eyes.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Yeah.
Deep Dream was an early attempt at doing image generation, but because the models were so bad, they could just sort of come up with these crazy psychedelic, hallucinogenic images, and that was for a lot of people our first introduction to AI. And so maybe that's part of it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, like, yeah, that actually might be like, I don't know the history of hallucination as a term in the generative AI space, but yeah, when now you bring that up, it would not shock me if like the fact that like Deep Dream was like this first big consumer facing thing might have had something to do with it. If not its invention, then like its wide and rapid acceptance as like the metaphor for a certain type of AI failure. Um, so I want to get to more talking about I think it's like the way that the embodiment critique applies to symbolic AI, I think is it's very, very clear to me. It's like, because you can say like, oh yeah, obviously embodiment creates all these ways of interacting with the world that you can't represent in terms of like rules in search trees. Um, it's more difficult to talk about like why, other than just like what mere sensory input, and then you get to the idea that like, yeah, Waymo maybe because it's got sensory input is going to get you closer to general AI. Like, what about embodiment um, differentiates LLMs from human intelligence? And I think there is this sensory input element, and but I think there's another element which I've unfortunately Dreyfus himself doesn't really hammer on, I think, enough. And it's interesting because he talks about Maurice Merleau-Ponty quite a bit, and the element that he's missing is actually a relatively big theme in the later parts of Merleau-Ponty's work. And this is something that I actually had the AI hallucinate, because I like threw some of my notes and some stuff into ChatGPT 2.5 research mode earlier today to like refresh myself to get prepared for this podcast, since we initially intended to do this back in mid-July. And I actually asked this question. I was like, um, so here's my argument for like why emotion is a meaningful part of embodiment and rationality. Like, what did Dreyfus have to say about this? And then the AI just hallucinated a bunch of answers to this that are not in the book, but are plausible, good answers, by the way, for like why these things might matter. Um, so like this feels to me like a missing element. Like um, Merleau-Ponty makes this point. He's like, yeah, there's like all these ways that seem like rule based in which we like whittle down information. So like the elegance principle is one. It's like, all right, this is the most elegant solution to the problem, so we'll go to this. But even elegance itself is kind of an emotional and aesthetic value. It's not just a purely logical value. Just because it's a simpler solution, that doesn't mean that it's a more accurate solution from a purely logical point of view. And he moves on from there to like talking about how like, no, actually our way of navigating the world in general is always undergirded by these emotional impulses, that they are deeply embedded within the framework of how we act as rational beings, to where there's no real boundary um, between these two things. Um, and I think about this, um, you know, it's such a trite example, but I actually do think it's like the best way to talk about this in pop culture. Did you ever watch Star Trek: The Next Generation?
No, no, I didn't.
Okay, so there's a character in Star Trek: The Next Generation, Lieutenant Commander Data, and he's an android. And so he's an artificial general intelligence. He can do almost anything a human being can do, but he has no emotion. But the problem is that the writers continually can't write a character who has no emotion. So he's constantly expressing like wants or preferences. It's like, well, why did the android join Starfleet? It's like, well, he wanted to like give back to humanity and all this stuff. It was like, well, that kind of sounds like an emotional, like not necessarily a rational value. There's a famous episode where it's like they establish him as like a sentient being that has rights. But one of the key points of this episode is like actually like revealing that he seems to have sentimentality. And like the writers never, I think, clearly know what to do with this. Like they play with the idea that like maybe the robot has emotions after all, but I really do think it's impossible in the end for us to write about rationality without emotion. And you do see this in how people interact with LLMs. Like they feel like the LLMs have feelings. Like when the LLM apologizes or when they scold the LLM, they feel like they've hurt someone's feelings. Or the saying why people say thank you to the LLM. By the way, I always say thank you to the LLM.
Just in
And
case the LLMs of the future are listening
yeah,
and
yeah,
they need
just
to
in case
decide.
Yudkowsky is right, and then they're going to form Roko's basilisk, and it's going to be like, yeah, you said thank you all the time. You will not. You will go in the zoo instead of being slain. Uh, though I did have this dream one time that OpenAI called me, and they were angry at how many tokens I was wasting being polite
Mm,
to the AI.
yeah. Stop telling the AI good morning, everyone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sending the AI like
The
the
GM.
Indian good morning memes every day.
Yeah. Running tokens that way. So much power. Yeah, I think this aspect of emotion is interesting. There are kind of two angles to it. One is this intellectual question of like, okay, can you actually navigate through the world without emotion, right? And I like that you moved it to this place because that's like
Yeah,
a non obvious component of the embodiment discussion.
yeah,
Is that everything that does navigate through the world autonomously seems to have emotion, or I don't know, maybe insects don't have emotion exactly, but they certainly react to things.
yeah. I mean, I think they have
Um,
some sort of like affective experience, which if it doesn't arrive to like what we think of as passions, like it definitely arrives at some sort of like reactive thing that comes from like a deep bodily experience.
yeah, yeah, and then of course we have like pretty good evidence that higher order mammals, especially, all definitely have emotions and things like that.
Yeah,
So, um, yeah, I think if you push, I'm going to push a little away from the pure technology side, and I think if you put it through an evolutionary framework, right, then the reason for having the emotions, that the emotions are indicators to you
yeah,
about the state of the world, right? Whether
yeah,
that's the state of your environment or something you should stay away from, or whatever it may be, right? And kind of the reason they exist is because it's like impractical and probably also impossible to, again, going back to this discussion about like about the limits of symbolic AI, to like understand how to navigate through the complexity of the world in a way that has explicit rules. And part
yeah,
of the reason why is because you're going to be continually confronted with situations that are not situations that you've been in before.
yes, yeah.
and the
This
result of and the result
go,
of
yeah,
this,
go
you
ahead.
you end up having to use like things like intuition, for example. Like,
Yeah,
oh, I was talking to this guy and it was going normal, and then something weird happened, and I felt like I just needed to leave right then. It's like
yeah,
you don't have a rational, explicit set of rules in your head to explain why it was good to get out of that situation. What was happening is that your emotional system cued you into
yeah,
something that was very latent, and that's like an evolved mechanism for your own survival.
yeah. I in the past I used to do a lot of social and charity work with people who are homeless, and a lot of people on home who are homeless are somewhere on the schizophrenic spectrum, and you sort of quickly learn to develop this sense of like the guy who's schizophrenic and relatively harmless and the guy who's schizophrenic and might like suddenly start violently lashing out at you and being a problem. And there's no real way to reduce this into rules. And there isn't really a way to like sort of assign like real statistical probability to this. Like you could like there's no way to like say like, oh, I'm doing like this expected value calculation on this interaction with this guy. Like this recently happened to me in McDonald's, where this guy was like, to me, clearly potentially violent, and I was thinking about like how to like defuse him from getting mad at these teenagers that he was really angry with. And there's no way to go, oh, well, actually, like the expected value calculation, there was really only a 30% chance of him becoming violent, and you had like raised the chance by like, 5 or 10% by like trying to intervene at all. It's like you just sort of have to make these calls on like um these gut senses, and I think that's perfectly rational. I do think that that is an act of paradigmatic rationality, is like to read the environment and react in the best way that you know how to making that environment safer. um, but I do think there's another important role to emotion, um, that I've thought about a lot actually since my wife got cancer. And it is the role of emotion as like this anticipatory thing. Is like that the emotion that you have towards some sort of future oriented event, like itself helps you rehearse how you're going to behave in that future event. It's sort of like it propels you forward into that future and then forces you to confront it and prepare for it and analyze it in a more rational manner. So when you're confronted with it, you actually aren't overwhelmed with the emotional experience at that time. And you're able to act in a more reasonable manner. Because I actually had a discussion relatively recently about this in a group chat, where someone was saying, oh, after Charlie Kirk's assassination, that someone that they knew was getting sort of like immediately worried about political violence in their particular context. And like one of the responses was like, oh, political violence is statistically rare. Like, you don't have to worry about it. It's just like a like worrying about getting struck by lightning or your plane crashing or something like that. And I just like, I don't think that's true. I think one, it's actually a good exercise of rationality to react to a rare event and assess, hey, what is my likelihood of getting involved in a rare event like this? How would I react if this rare event happened to me? And the irrational thing is to then over index on your emotional reaction to that rare event. Like if you had decided, I'm not going to go into work anymore because there might be a crazed shooter, like that would be deeply irrational. But I actually think it's deeply rational to have the emotional reaction and then process that emotional reaction. And how do you get this sort of anticipatory emotion and preparation out of the machine? And I'm not saying it's impossible, but the more that I've thought about this um over the past couple years, I keep coming back to just though how important this role is of emotion and making us understand and have empathy with our future selves and also with other people. Like I think that's the other thing that emotion does is when you imagine your emotional reaction to this thing, like, oh, what if this happened to me? Well, rare events happen all the time, but they mostly happen to other people. And you're then able to act in such a way that you can I think like react with more grace, more rationality. Like you can be a better help to people facing these rare events, because like in some sense you've rehearsed it emotionally through like your own fear or even like gleeful anticipation.
Yeah. So it certainly plays a social function,
Yeah.
which is also something that we try very hard to strong arm these LLMs into doing that they would
Yeah.
otherwise pretty naturally have no reason to be doing. That is, there's all these discussion around AI ethics, in particular, the recent flurry around like GPT induced psychosis, for example,
Yeah.
um, is all about like what is the social role of these LLMs, right? If someone is suicidal already and they're talking to an LLM all day, is it the responsibility of that LLM to prevent that from happening? There was a recent interview with Tucker Carlson and Sam Altman where Sam basically had to say, well, there's a certain number of people every day who are suicidal, and a certain
Yeah.
number of those people are going to log on to ChatGPT, and a percentage of them are going to kill themselves anyway afterward.
Yeah.
And we need to decide like what percentage of those people is tolerable.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I'm not a utilitarian, and so I understand like why, and it's also partly his affect. Like, I understand like why that like comes off as deeply horrible to a lot of people, but I also think that that's like, yeah, it's the inevitable answer that you have to give to these things. Like
Yeah, and
anything like this, you're going to be faced with a triage problem, and a triage problem is the place where you kind of have to use utilitarian reasoning because there's nothing else really that resolves the triage problem unless you just want to be this maximalist who says, oh, well, if anyone dies because of an interaction with an LLM, then we just have to ban this entire obviously useful technology.
yeah, and then I think your discussion around this preparatory function of emotion, I think is interesting. It's not something that I had considered.
Yeah.
Um, this thing where I think you're correct in that to some extent it seems like the emotion is there to titrate the response to
Yeah.
future events, right? When you talk about overreacting or underreacting, there's a version of it where you underreact that is underprepared for the future, and it's like
Right.
this bad thing is coming, and instead of actually like acknowledging that and accepting it and then deciding what you're going to do despite it, you stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not happening, and you just
Yeah.
wait, and then eventually it comes, and you're totally
Yeah.
screwed because
Yeah. You shut down the preparatory role of emotion because
right,
that preparatory role is too painful.
right. And then there's another disabling mode where you overreact. You bring all of you bring the entire future event into the present with you now, and
Right.
you experience all of this, the disabling emotion that it entails, and then you
Yeah.
become completely dysfunctional at a time when it's inappropriate for you to be dysfunctional,
Yeah.
and that is also suboptimal.
Yeah.
Right?
And then there's the positive, well, the negative, then there's the positive version of this too, is like and the anticipation of positive emotion of rewards for some future action. And like there's the obvious dysfunctional mode of this, which is you anticipate the reward of a $500 million Powerball jackpot. So then you go out and buy a whole bunch of tickets. And by the way, actually, I do think it's rational to buy one Powerball ticket when the jackpot is high enough, because you like it's like possible you get like just enough joy about imagining like what if you won versus like the $2 or whatever you're throwing away on the Powerball ticket. It's kind of like whatever. But yeah, it's clearly irrational. It's like, oh, I'm going to go into debt. Pervasive sports gambling is another thing. It's like, oh, if I just like learn how to beat the odds makers, I'm going to uh, become quite rich in the future. Uh, but that irrationality of like anticipating rewards, like actually also has a good societal function. And the example that I would like to bring up is startups. Startups are kind of like lottery tickets, right? Like, most of these things are going to fail.
Yeah. A startup
Yeah.
is a a deeply irrational thing to be doing.
Yeah,
Almost
it's
always.
yeah. It's like you can have this because even if you have an absolutely brilliant top of the line technical team, like you really do have like all the right guys in all the places, like you still might develop something that ends up it just doesn't have good market fit, or some other group of really smart guys was developing something that made you obsolete before you quite got out the door. Um, but we have like all these positive externalities in the world because not every really smart person decides to just be like an EV maxer and goes, "Yeah, I'll work for Microsoft or Apple and just stack cash." Or like the other example is going into academia. Like there are obvious like long tail benefits of people being in academia. But the majority of people going into academia who have like these dreams of I'll make a lasting, meaningful contribution to human knowledge are not going to play out. But society enormously benefits from people, very smart people, buying those lottery tickets.
Yeah, yeah. So again, those are domains where the the individual is not actually rationally acting rationally at all. They're acting out of emotion, but that emotion is useful to us as a society, and so we allow it to continue because of the positive externalities.
Yeah. But I think, yeah, I mean, marriage doesn't have like nearly the failure rate of startups, but like, most things like worth doing in life like have like some highly unpredictable outcomes at the end of them. And you can't just like you never know, like this is one of the problems I believe with utilitarian thinking being your primary mode of evaluating what to do in the world is like you can actually never have the majority of the relevant information entering into like any appropriately large decision. Um, and one nice thing about the way that LLMs reason is that they are perfectly happy to reason on highly incomplete information. And I do think that that is a real strength of LLMs.
Yeah,
Where I feel like they break down is where do they get their sense of what's important if you give them a very, very broad query. So if you try like an extremely broad query, like design a board game that's going to uh, open up space in this like particular genre, like they're going to flounder a lot because like they're not going to have like for a person who's doing this, they're usually going to have some sort of like weird inspiration, emotional inspiration that's going to undergird what they're doing. Like, oh, there's this theme that I'm really attracted to, and like because of that, like all these mechanics are going to flow outward from this theme. There's some aesthetic that like I just dreamed in my head, like came to me one day as if in a dream, how I wanted this board or this setup to look. Um, and these are like very important elements of human creativity. Um, the idea that you have to be a little bit mad to be a poet, like Plato says, like if you aren't captured by these forces that almost feel outside of you, where do you get in these more creative enterprises? Like even creative enterprises that do have like this highly rationalistic part of them, like game design. And I've been working as sort of like a very, very long pole hobby project on a on a game. And the LLM is very, very useful to me as a sounding board. okay, I want to like, this is a mechanic that I'm interested in. Like, how are some ways, we can represent this? Like, what are ways that we can implement this in the programming framework that I've been working with? And that it is quite good at. Like, it is, a very useful programming partner in that sense, but giving it these like more wide open space questions in which you would expect um, emotional values to play a much larger role in human thinking. Like that's an area where it flounders. And this isn't to say that like a sufficiently complex LLM like won't also be able to model. I'm not saying it would feel human emotions, but it might be able to model human emotions because like there's just enough emotional content out there for it to explore and complete on. But it is something that I think about is like no, I is that I keep coming back to it. It's like the more and more I analyze my everyday experience, the more and more I come away with, oh, actually all this emotional stuff, as rational, quote unquote, as I am in my approach to life, um, none of this rationality would function without the emotional element behind it.
Yeah, and it's not just the emotional element that helps you kind of fill in the gaps. It's also just the fact that you have such limited information just sitting down and thinking about a problem. And I work in I have a startup. I've worked in other startups. I've been a content creator for a number of years now, and one of the things that you learn over and over and over again in both of those domains is that there's just so much stuff that you are never going to be able to know a priori.
Yeah,
And the guiding phrase to all of this is you have to interface with reality. People say in
yeah,
business you have to interface with the market. Well, you have to interface with reality because there are so many things that are only going to be resolved once you actually run the computation. They're non-algorithmic. You just have to go do them.
yeah,
And uh, succeeding with your startup idea is like this. Succeeding, romance is like this. There are all kinds of
yeah,
things you're not going to be able to figure out sitting down at your desk or on your computer or staring into your phone.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and LLMs are no different.
yeah,
Um, to the extent that any of us have a good hint or a good, taste or intuition about something, it's because we've already gone through that experience over and
yeah,
over again. And this goes right back to the embodiment issue.
yeah. I think an undervalued person in a lot of startup contexts, by the way, is the intelligent, naive person. The person who already hasn't been constrained by the way that the field is supposed to work, but is very intelligent, but also has to be very, very willing to sound stupid. Like they have to be willing to like float ideas that have been rejected for very, very good reason by everyone who's been in the field for forever. But there is the upside that, 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20 times, like because they have not already absorbed all the assumptions of the space, that they are going to come up with a novel approach that might prove fruitful. And that is another area in which, in working with LLMs, like I don't see them achieving that because of their sort of autocomplete nature. They're usually just working within the field as it's understood by the corpus.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting if we got better techniques in the future for getting the LLMs to, I don't know, go a little bit off the beaten path
Yeah.
for certain problem domains without explicitly prompting them to do so.
Yeah.
Because again, a lot of the workflow right now is like, okay, if I want it to behave in the ways that I need for my particular problems that I'm trying to solve. I have to give it all this context. I have to give it all this memory. I have to give it reminders, right? Over and over again, I'm correcting it. I'm like giving it braces almost,
Mm-hmm.
in order to have it behave in the way that's particular to how I need it to behave with the thing that I'm trying to achieve right now, rather than
Yeah.
the way that it would behave more generally for the rest of the world.
Yeah. It even it's even interesting how LLMs fell this at like a more explicit like trying like corpus trimming level. Like I've tried this both Gemini and ChatGPT research modes, where sometimes I tell it, "Hey, research this problem. Do not include any references from Reddit." And this isn't because I hate Reddit or I think it's unuseful for certain types of problems. Like I had a stupid um, audio system debugging issue a couple weeks ago. And I was very, very happy to let it include Reddit, as Reddit is like a very likely source of good answers for that particular problem. Um, but anyways, when I sometimes include this, like please exclude Reddit uh, things in my queries, about half the time the LLM just like includes, a dozen Reddit sources anyways. Like, so even when I try to like, let's explicitly like redefine the universe of research here, it just kind of goes, nope, I'm gonna do my thing anyways. And also, when it doesn't explicitly cite Reddit, it's actually very, very hard to know with whether or not on the back end it was just citing, building a lot from Reddit anyways. It just decided to omit the Reddit links from its research links that it gives you, because like the LLM will lie to you. So
Yeah, it's optimizing a reward function. So
yeah. Um, but yeah, it is fascinating to me, like the way in which these things have become powerful enough to be very, very useful. Uh, like a function that I use research mode for on Gemini almost daily is getting it to give me a bunch of links to sources on a particular topic. And that used to be where the closest I could get to that was by going to Wikipedia and like looking at a source list on Wikipedia. But that's not a great way to approach every single question. Like I had a weird GDPR compliance question that came up recently in work. If I'm going to search Wikipedia for the GDPR, there's almost zero chance that my particular weird GDPR question was going to get addressed in the Wikipedia article and thus have a link. But I could go to an LLM research mode, ask it that, and it compiled a bunch of links. And indeed, one of them was a very, very detailed explanation of my particular question written by a British law firm. Like, so I found exactly what I needed in a way that I would have never found through Google search. So I am in no way a person who thinks that LLMs are not a revolutionary technology. Um, but where I want to go from here, and this is kind of interesting, I feel like if we had done this podcast 2 months ago, when we originally planned to, this would maybe sound uh, more contrarian. But I feel like in the last 2 months, we've already moved to this mood where people are a little less, they're a little, okay, they're more bullish. Less bullish. I say they're less bullish on AI than they were just 2 months ago. Already you're seeing people say, actually, like for some of the significant improvements that we really want to see, like we're maybe more like 5 or 6 years away now instead of like 6 months away. So that is a change. But the broader question just is, one, the basic question of, can LLMs become AGI? The next question is, can some combination of LLMs, robotics, symbolic AI, can those become AGI? And or is there just something else that we're not imagining, or is it just that actually the problem is that human intelligence is so different from computational intelligence that we're never really going to have what we would consider a traditional sense of AGI, which is a fully human like intelligence. Like we might have a super intelligence, which is greater than human intelligence across most domains, but it's still not going to quite function in a human like manner. Sort of the three questions. It'd be interesting what you think about the first question, which is like, where do you stand on like, can you, a sufficiently complex LLM on its own become AGI?
Okay. Well, that's pretty narrow, right?
Yeah,
A sufficiently complex LLM. I don't think so, personally.
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, that would be the basics of it. I mean, the thing is, we are getting these multimodal models now, which are transformers.
right,
And they can do images and they can do text and speech. So okay, you've got like three different uh, modalities. They're not exactly sense modalities, but
right.
you've got three different intelligence modalities, and they seem to be pretty good at interchanging them. And so um, that's like pretty impressive. But for me personally, I and I'm not a machine learning researcher by any means. I I have a sort of parochial idea that you do need embodiment, because I think the world is just too rich. There's too much rich data, and I think that if you're limited to just an LLM, you don't have high enough bandwidth.
Yeah. I agree with you, and I expected like this was going to be like a pretty quick dismissal like from both of us on this question. So the next question then is like this idea of the hybrid model where like you do bring in robotics, like you do bring in sense data, and you also have like some sort of exit to symbolic AI when that's the appropriate problem solving mechanism. Um, though there is a real question to people I've talked to in this space about the difficulty of getting the LLM to recognize when it would need to exit to the symbolic space at all, which humans seem to be quite good at. But and why are we good at that? Like, I think that's a another question worth asking. It's that's just a more philosophical question at this point. But um, whether or not you think that that combination like has enough promise that that could become AGI.
So I think this question pertains a lot to the kind of problems that we're focused on solving in AI as a field right now, which is that there's sort of the rise of what people are calling agentic AI or agents. A lot of people are
Yeah,
trying to build agents. You also have sort of the increasing reliance on tool use. So all of these research functions like web search, as
yeah,
well as different kinds of sort of more interactive AI applications, like some of the AI coding tools, things like Claude Code or Cursor. Um, these are AI systems, as well as I might say, model context protocol (MCP) is a big component of this. These are all ways in which we're attempting to give AIs access to tools,
right.
and we're giving them we're putting the LLM in an iterative loop with access to those tools, and then we're saying, okay, to solve this problem, here are all the tools at your disposal. You go and identify, based on your understanding of the problem that I presented to you, which tools you need to use, and then go use them appropriately to help get it done. Right. this is starting to look like a combination of symbolic AI, right? And in a way, it is a form of robotics. I mean, it's still
Yeah.
mostly software, right? As far as I know, there's not an MCP server that's doing like moving things around in the physical world, but
Right.
we're not very far away from one. And I think in principle, it could already be happening. In fact, I'm gonna go look that up after the show. But um,
I
you
imagine
know,
if it isn't happening publicly, it's happening in some DARPA lab or
yeah, yeah, or you know, I could have my, if I wanted to hook my home assistant up to the light system, I could start, doing a little tiny robotics things here and there. Um,
yeah.
so the thing is, yes, this is the space we're in right now is how much ground can we cover by just making them good at using these tools and giving them
Yeah.
lots of tools to use. Um, the 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 sorry state of things at the moment is that the LLMs are still not very good at using the tools that they need to use, figuring out which tools to use, and also doing so like consistently, even when you tell them.
Yeah.
And so we're like stuck solving these like very quagmiry problems of like, oh, I gave you these 6 tools, and one of them says use this to solve problem Y, and I asked you to solve problem Y, and you used another tool, or you didn't use it at
Yeah.
all. Um, so these sound like very basic, kind of like still trying to teach a kindergartner how to like use a fork,
Yeah.
rules, like problems. But they are, but they're promising, and
Yeah.
I will give you an unsatisfactory answer and say that I think there are a lot more problems than people imagine who are bearish on this that are going to get solved in an
Yeah.
incremental way by just moving up this incline of this paradigm. I don't know
Yeah.
if it gets us all the way to AGI though.
Yeah. No, I'm actually kind of with you. I think we're going to make a lot more progress than the strong bearish people expect along this way. And I even suspect it in this kind of strange way. So like there's a something I keep coming back around to as I've been thinking about this problem. Um like I reread this book a few years back when the first consumer chat models started coming out. And even back then, I was anticipating the point because people were talking about it like, oh, what happens when we let when we give them more ability to like actually have unfettered access to the internet, right? And they can explore that space and bring it back in real time rather than just being set on their original corpus. And this is like what I think of as like it's the uh, it's the cyberpunk embodiment. So it's the net, the internet itself as a for the LLM, it's equivalent of physical space. It is this like changing form of at hand information and like because the LLM isn't if it's if it's a consciousness, if it's it is an alien consciousness that type of data, it has a different relationship towards the internet than we can possibly ever have. And that means that in some ways it can become a world picture for that agent in a way that it is not for us. Like that is one thing I've considered. It's like, okay, well maybe there's this version of AGI that's out there where like this thing is fully conscious, but it's conscious because it has a body and a world that is entirely unlike ours, so it's going to be very very hard for us to recognize it. Um and the
Yeah.
robotics, yeah, go ahead from
Well,
that.
I have a kind of pedantic,
Yeah.
nitpicky thing to say, which is we've already slid from intelligence into consciousness,
Yeah.
and I don't know if we should treat those as the same thing.
No, they aren't the same thing. I'm saying like in order for I think this to like to have I think in order to have space, I think this is another important aspect of Merleau-Ponty that Dreyfus doesn't go as far into. Like there's the entire like back third of phenomenology of perception is phenomenology is often seen as a critique of like Cartesian dualism, and it is, but like the entire like back third actually is really about the Cartesian cognito. And one of the things that Merleau-Ponty keeps coming back to is like, well, no, it's like actually an important part of human consciousness and human rationality is this awareness that we are thinking, is the self-referential nature of human consciousness. It doesn't mean that you're always consciously aware, oh hey, I'm this thing that's thinking. Like there's not always that metacognitive awareness level, but like that metacognitive layer is actually, which we can call consciousness. I don't know if that's, I would not say that that's the definition of consciousness, but that's one way to look at it. Like that metacognitive layer is actually an important aspect of how rationality, how intelligence works for beings. Um, and so for me, I would say my definition of AGI, which I know is not shared by a lot of people in the community, I think would have to have some of this aspect of metacognition.
Well, uh, hmm, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, so
Yeah, no, I expected this to be a place where we would disagree.
I had an interview
So
with, yeah, I had an interview with the Neil, what is his name? My interview with the Neil, Mahav Mahaprata. I forget his last name. Uh, you know, he's a biochemist guy who did a lot of very interesting work in computational biology. And the reason him and I spoke was Malavarapu, I believe,
yeah.
was to allow him to present his argument about why AI can't be conscious. And we don't have the time to go into all of this, the whole thing today. But I
Yeah,
think
I
that,
listened to the interview. It's good.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think that when you just start talking about like, like sort of the Douglas Hofstadter, like I am a strange loop,
Yeah.
self-referential aspect of consciousness, it's a little hand wavy, right? And again, it's hard for someone to say this because even defining consciousness itself becomes a big problem when you've got like the arguments from like um, in like the hard problem and like, oh, what consciousness means, uh, what it's like to be a thing, right? Or what
Yeah.
it's like it's a sense of one's own awareness of being. Okay, well that sounds kind of self-referential, right? Like there's certainly some kind of recursive element there. But I think when you start saying that that's all that it is, then it starts to get a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. And then the other thing is, I think you also run into this issue, and we talked about this in that talk I just referenced as well, of like, well, how do I know that the machine is not just telling me that it's being self-referential,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
That is when I go talk to Claude right now, and I ask it a very complicated query, and I turn on sequential thinking mode, which is
Yeah.
an MCP mode you can activate. Um, it sure sometimes looks self-referential, right? Like it'll
Yeah.
go back and say, "Oh, I missed this thing over here. I need to go back and change this."
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, okay, well, is that self-referential? Is that self-referential enough? Like, who,
Yeah.
you know,
No. Like there is a real problem, and there's not only that. It's like even much simpler models because like that's sort of the expected answer to the question. If you just like directly in do a direct inquiry about whether or not it's conscious, it might tell you like, yeah, I'm conscious. Though more recent models seem to have like had some safeguards put around that to where they're much less likely to answer those questions in the positive than it feels like they were just a year ago.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, metacognition,
Yeah.
okay, that's good. But in a way, metacognition is really just like running a loop, right?
Yeah.
If I run a loop, I can have a stop point somewhere in the loop that says, "Hey, that thing that you did 3 steps back, or like, are you analyzing it?" You
Yeah.
know, like even our own experience of metacognition is inherently like sequential because we
Yeah.
have like you know time perception.
Yeah.
Um,
This is
and-
this, yeah. This is why I'm not though like a completely spooky and skeptic of AGI. Like I think
Mhm.
there is like there's two ways of like uh being skeptical about AGI, and I think there's like the very grounded critiques of like what involves actual intelligent thinking and like what are all the modes that go into intelligent thinking. And then there's like what I said is the spooky theory, which is basically like, well, the computer can't have a soul, so therefore it can never be intelligent. And I'm not a spooky theorist. I do think that there's nothing metaphysical that is the boundary that prevents um, a machine from having being an artificial general intelligence.
uh, yeah, I think I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't see why there needs to be a metaphysical component to
Yeah.
intelligence.
Yeah. Like I think you can fully like I think it is theoretically possible with like the exact perfect technology. Though I think it's probably going to involve like lots of advances in materials science and other areas like to quite get to the same sort of interaction with the world that human beings have. Like the same sort of like awareness and the type of embodied awareness. Cause like you could say, all right, what am I aware of at all moments? It's like, well, like I'm aware of sound. I'm aware of like my body and how it feels and like its relative position in space. I have my visual field. I have like the sense of how hot or cold I am. Um, and for example, on the hot or cold question, you're like, okay, well, we can put a thermometer in the machine to measure the ambient air temperature. But sort of like knowing the ambient air temperature is not the experience of being hot or cold. It is not like the knowledge of it being 72 degrees is what defines how I feel at the moment. You know, it's also my level of exertion or just like how I'm feeling at the moment. 70 or what I'm wearing, like 72 might be far too warm or it might be far too cold. Um
Yeah, and
yeah, there's these subtle elements where, but you can imagine advancements in materials science that like bleed over this boundary and like create like a more from our point of view like natural way of interfacing with the world in the future. Like I try not to limit my imagination about what sort of machines we could build to like what seems feasible in the next 10 years.
yeah, I just think you know back to the point about like the spooky. I like the spooky intelligence detractor notion because it. I think for people, especially that value their own intelligence,
Yeah.
it's a little hubristic. It starts to move into like Mephistopheles territory to assume that in order to be intelligence, one must partake in the divine spark. You know,
Yeah.
it's like it's obviously, well, not obviously, but it's in my belief not the case that that intelligence needs to be something special only for the domains
Yeah.
of humans.
Yeah. That is actually an interesting thing. Dreyfus actually does bring the spooky objection up in the book. He doesn't call it that, but he's kind of poo-pooing it, not from the point of view that it's illegitimate or like he just feels like um the people who are going to that are just like too um they just aren't in awe enough at the capabilities of human intelligence that they think that they need to go to this spooky objection. And I think that that reaction to um, the project in the 60s and 70s is justified. Like, if you're just looking at symbolic AI and that's what you know, then yeah, it's like, why were these people that worried that only some sort of like divine spark was going to be the difference between humans and machines? Um, but now I think we do have to it's very I'm still an AGI skeptic. Not in that I think it's impossible. I just find it unlikely. But I do think that once you concede that machine intelligence is impossible, uh, there is some sort of moral question that you do have to start answering for yourself is what would possibly prioritize humans over machines at any point, which is something that I think some people reasonably worry about. Like, what is the yeah, what is the ethical place, or whether you should prioritize humans over machines? But like, what is the ethical place? And I do feel like that's getting beyond the discussion of this particular book. I just wanted to note this because like I do think that this sort of deep, like, once again, this goes back to what I was saying about I think the emotional role of rationality. There's this deep emotional reaction and sense that this is something that we have to deal with at some point, and even if it's very unlikely that it happens. And I do think that that reaction and so forth is a rational act that compels us along potentially useful philosophical research programs.
Yeah, I just don't know if it's our obligation to like increase the amount of total intelligence in the universe at our
Yeah.
own expense, like the EAC people believe.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah. I
just
no, I 100% believe that those people are incorrect. But even if you don't take this sort of like maximalist view of intelligence is this sort of unmitigated good and more intelligence in the universe is better than less intelligence, you still do have to come up with answers to questions about priorities because I mean, like, we struggle with these questions about priorities all the time already with animals. Like, how much animal suffering is worth human benefit in various ways. And so we're 100% going to run up against these questions if we have intelligent machines. Is what sort of conditions, what number of machines, etc.
maybe it's not clear that
Yeah.
intelligence entails suffering.
Yeah. Well, right. I'm not saying that the machines will suffer, but people might suffer.
Oh, yeah. Well, people
Yeah.
are already suffering. People have always been
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. And the question is like how much human suffering do you tolerate because the machines like have like these positive externalities. Because everything involves trade-offs. And like I don't believe that I mean it's already clear to me that the introduction of LLMs, I think it's going to be like a lot of advancements over the past I don't know, 100 years now of human technology, where I think it's going to be very, very highly beneficial to probably about the top decile of people. And it is probably going to make life slightly worse, but in hard to quantify ways for a lot of the people in the bottom quintile.
Maybe. I'm not sure I totally buy into
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah. I'm not 100% that this is what's going to happen. It's just sort of like that's my sort of low information bet at this point in time, is that that's kind of been how of a number of developments have shaken out in the past. So it would not surprise me if that is how this one does as well.
in relative terms, it might actually just make life worse for the middle quintiles.
Yeah, yeah,
And in
that's
absolute terms, the bottom quintile might not be that changed.
yeah, like that's another possibility too. But yeah, I think about this um, in relation sometimes to recorded music, where that actually is a case where it's mostly like the middle group of people who are the most impacted. It's because people up in the upper decile, like they still often learn to play instruments, they often learn to sing, they often learn to produce things themselves, and that like this entire aspect of human culture, which is very, very important on a mass level for most of human history, gets completely cut out for many, many people in favor of just consuming recorded music. And maybe you're experiencing this where you are right now, but I've definitely experienced this in other places where that aspect of modernity like really hit much later, and there's more pervasive knowledge among general people of the same folk songs, or like being able to play simple instruments and so forth. And if you've experienced that, then you do like realize, oh yeah, this was like a cultural and civilizational loss for these people that sort of came by accident. And it's not like I would go back in this sense and like, ah yeah, we got to wipe recorded music from the face of the world, but it is not like it is a technology that didn't come with cultural downsides as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But anyways, I think this is we've gone off the rails enough, but I think it's given a good idea to listeners about like why this book might still be worth reading, which is another thing that people are sometimes skeptical of. It's like, oh, I've heard this is about mostly about like an older AI paradigm, like how useful it is it to read this now. And maybe like one way to approach this book, and I'd be interested in seeing what you had to say about this, is maybe just to read the introduction, because the introduction kind of recapitulates a lot of the critiques of good old fashioned symbolic AI that he makes throughout the first part of the book, anyways, and then also puts in the anticipations of new developments, and then just focus on parts 2 and 3, which is more where he lays out the phenomenological critique and the idea of research programs, which might be able to might be informed by and maybe overcome the phenomenological critique of AI.
Yeah, I think that's accurate in terms of like getting the most value out of the book,
Yeah,
and maybe familiarizing yourself with some of the references in the field of phenomenology.
yeah,
Also, I think if someone were trying to investigate this question of like, can we do a wraparound and like bring elements of symbolic AI back into the fold with the
yeah,
current paradigms, I think this book would be uh, a good primer on the previous failures of symbolic AI, why they happened, and what to sort of look for if you were trying to get
yeah,
value out of combining these two paradigms.
yeah. So, anyways, it's been a good discussion. So thank you, Alex, for coming on. Hopefully, have you on again sometime, maybe to discuss completely something completely different, because I know you're a guy with wide interests, and who's also willing to dive in the deep end on something new too as well. It's been a lot of fun. So thank everyone for listening. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Please follow the Substack if you're listening to it there. And thank you. This was the Horizons Review discussing Hubert Dreyfus's What Computers Still Can't Do.